Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of collaborations and look at somebody who I've been extremely interested in ever since checking them out the first time. They are Colin Stetson. We originally listened to a phenomenal masterclass in circulatory breathing called The Love It Took to Leave You. And today we're going to be listening to another track of his. He'll be working with Laurie Anderson and Sharon Nova. In this trio, Colin does the saxophone, Laurie does the spoken word, and Shara does the vocals. So I'm interested in seeing how all this comes together, especially since the song is just shy of 3 minutes, so it's a rather short track. All right, let's dive into this. Colin Stetson's Fear of the Unknown and the Blazing Sun.
Of all the wires, it was the wires that were the wires for empathy that we loved beyond all the others. Of all the wires, it was the wires that were the wires for empathy that we loved beyond all the others. The sound of that much light streaming in, ghosts made of smoke, the paper trees. Dogs travel back and forth between fear of the unknown and the blazing sun. Though there is stillness, I can feel your heartbeat. Though I can't see you, I can hear a sound. So tell your secrets to parrots. Father and to his father and to his father, reaching through to the other side. To this conversation itself, just the substitute. Reaching through to the other side. Words rattle. Reaching through to the other side.
Wow. Why is that so heartbreaking? That is one of the saddest. I don't know if I should say saddest. One of the most sorrowful songs I've heard in a long time. I don't know if I want to say sad. There's a very deep longing for something in that music. And there's almost this understanding that something is unobtainable. Like no matter how hard you try to fill this void, and you know what it is, like you know what's missing. It's not a guess. You know what's missing, you know what you need to fill it, or you know what you need to get rid of this longing, right? You know what the missing piece is, and no matter what you do, you can't obtain that missing piece. And the sad thing is that the twist is that you fully acknowledge that you can't fill it, that what you need is unobtainable, but it does not stop you from trying because the alternative is giving up. And that's not something that you can reconcile with. That's not something that you can deal with, right? You can't allow yourself to believe that there's nothing that can be done. That's hopeless. And hopelessness is not something that you're going to allow to flutter around in your mind. So you continue to seek out this thing that you cannot have because the alternative would kill you. That's the feeling I get out of this song. There is so much pain in here. It is, and uh, and the thing too, again, Colin does a fantastic job of creating these vivid atmospheres with just his body and an instrument, right? So I'm going to assume that much like with the love it took to leave you, that he is one doing circulatory breathing here because it seems like there were no breaks in the saxophone part. It was a single riff with minor variations on it for about a minute and a half, I suppose. It didn't come in for a little bit. We had the rhythmic tapping and the spoken word for a little bit there at the beginning. But once that came in, I don't believe there were any stops until the end. So we have the circulatory breathing put up back on display. And for those who weren't around for that video, I don't think I've talked about it since. Circulatory breathing is a way of there's a couple of different ways to do it, especially depending on what instrument you're utilizing, but at least for me being a trumpet player, this is how I was taught to do it, and I do it very poorly. It's something that takes a lot of time to practice and master. Colin makes it sound so easy, especially when we watched him do it live. He makes it look so effortless. But the idea is to push the air from your lungs into your cheeks and to use your cheek muscles to push the air out while you use your respiratory system to breathe in through your nose to fill your lungs back up. Right? So then you can use what's in your lungs and you can push that out. And when you get to the end of it, when you need to take a breath, you push what remains into your cheeks. You compress your cheeks to push it out and you breathe in while you're doing that. And it's a circle of breathing so that you never have to actually take a breath and breathe in through your mouth. It is not easy. It takes a long time to learn how to do well and effortless, and Colin's display of it is just fascinating. But I also believe that some of those lower hums that we heard center panned in the middle of the track, I at first thought was the singing, and it's possible that it was. However, the vocalist also came in a little bit after that, and there's a huge gap in the range. And it didn't sound like she was really pushing to get into the higher part of her range. It felt very comfortable. So while I wouldn't say it's impossible for her to hit some of the notes that we heard in that humming section, I'm going to wager that it was that device that Colin puts around his throat that kind of picks up the vibrations from his vocal cords and runs through, I don't know, an amplifier maybe, could be some pedals. There's a lot of compression put on it. It sounded like, um, and I mean, just once again, it is phenomenal to think that he's doing circulatory breathing, playing the stuff on a saxophone, and humming these whole notes all at the same time. Like, the dude just blows my mind as a performer. Um, and I want to get into something else in a moment, but then we get the vocalist after this, and we have this set up, just very, very separated triangle right here, where the spoken word is hard left, the saxophone is hard right, the percussive element is like center left, and then we have humming and vocals straight on in center. But there's so much distance between all of this. It almost sounds like, it doesn't sound like they're all on a stage in front of you. And, maybe you're in the front row so that you have this full, angle of sound being thrown at you. It sounds literally like you're in a hallway and somebody's ahead of you and the other people are playing in rooms next to you. And there's just all this space between them. There's a lot of distance in the sound sphere. It feels very isolating. Every voice in this track feels isolated, almost trying to reach out to those around them. They're all participating in this ritual of sound collaboration that we call music, but despite their collaboration, despite the fact that they are working together to create this piece of music, they are more than an arm's reach apart. It's sad. There's distance that cannot be covered here. No matter how loud any of them get, it really is the reverberations that reach their fellow musicians, not them themselves. And I think that's part of what's so haunting about it. It's not just this feeling of missing something and knowing you can't have it, but also the fact that it almost feels like all three of these musicians are in the same boat. And maybe if they got in contact, they'd be able to help each other achieve what's missing. But no matter what, they're all just on the periphery. They know where they are. They know where they are. They can see them. They just can't reach out to them and make that connection. One last note I want to make before we get into the lyrics or the poetry, I suppose we can call the spoken word part, is the percussive element. I don't think that's another instrument. I think that's the saxophone, which is kind of genius. So if you've ever played saxophone, you know that they're not super loud, but pressing the keys can make little clunks and thunks and clicks. It's not, I mean, every instrument does, right? Like even on a trumpet, If your valves aren't lubed up properly, then they can make some screeching sounds sometimes. You have the springs in the valves that shoot them back up, and they can sometimes make noises. You know, moving the tuning slides can make noises. Like every instrument makes noises because, for the most part, they are moving parts. The only thing that really wouldn't make one would be like a bugle, like an old timey bugle. Just you blow in this end and the noise comes out the other. There's no moving part that would introduce any sort of vibrations that could create sound. But at least to my ears, when I think of saxophones, maybe it's because I don't even know why. I think of noisy buttons much more so than clarinets, which actually have very similar button styles to them. Um, and valves, not valves. Yeah, they're called valves, aren't they? I don't know the holes that you cover, and like sometimes they have metal rims that would apply movement in a different area of the instrument. Like it's kind of bonkers how complex something like the clarinet and the saxophone is, especially compared to the flute, which is mostly the same. You blow in one side and you cover up holes throughout it, and then the sound comes out. But there's no moving parts on the flute. You literally just cover the holes, much like a recorder. But with saxophones and clarinets, at least modern day saxophones and clarinets, there's a lot of mechanical elements to it. Where you push one button here and it moves like valves and stems and covers in other parts of the instruments. Kind of fascinating how complex they are. Anyways, though, I'm pretty sure he hooked up a tiny, probably like a lavalier microphone to whatever he's playing because the rhythm is identical to his rhythm. And I would wager that he's just picking up those tiny vibrations and clacking from pressing the keys down and amplifying that and making that the rhythmic cadence of the track by making it into a percussive, meaty, bassy sound that would accompany his rhythmic playing, which makes the intro of the track interesting because that means that he was pantomiming what he would eventually play without actually putting air into the instrument to create the percussive element before he actually starts playing the saxophone more traditionally. Again, I mean, just like the humming with that device and the circulatory breathing, it's just more of that thinking outside the box and maximizing uh, the impact of his minimal approach. He is one man and a saxophone, and he constantly finds ways to add layers and to double up work. Why make a percussion track when you're already making sounds by playing your instrument? Take that and repurpose it. Why do we need another instrument in this idea? We already have percussive sounds. Let's use them. It's that wonderful, wonderful outside the box thinking that he does. All right, so let's get into the lyrics here. I'm kind of worried about this because I mean the song's already heavy for me musically. I really don't want to be thrown down a deep rabbit hole, but let's see what we got. So yeah, we have this thing about the wires. I remember that in the opening. The spoken word was, of all the wires, it was the wires that were the wires for empathy, that we guard beyond all the others. Of all the wires, it was the wires that were the wires for empathy that we loved beyond all the others. The sound of all that much life streaming in, ghosts made of smoke and paper trees. And dogs travel back and forth between the rocks, between fear of the unknown and the blazing sun. I believe this is where, yeah, so the italicized parts are probably the sung ones. Then we get an isolated singing line. Though there is stillness, I can feel your heartbeat. Though I can't see you, I can hear a sound. And then we have some call and response between the spoken word and the singing. Um, so tell your secrets to parrots, to your lost father, to his father, to his father. In this conversation itself, just a substitute for whistling, words rattling, blowing on puffs of air is what's spoken. What's sung is through the veil I feel your hand near me, reaching through to the other side, reaching through to the other side, reaching through to the other side. So there is this element of, like I mentioned, kind of showcased in the music of trying to bridge the distance between peoples, right? At least in this final section. Um, we have the idea of telling your secrets to your. Well, I mean, it says to your lost father and to his father and his father, but I think that doesn't necessarily mean like tell your secrets to your family so much as it means as to speak your secrets to those who came before you. But then in the singing, we have this very clear idea of through the veil, I feel your hand near me, reaching through to the other side, which that introduces, at least to me, the supernatural element of trying. I mean, even ties back to the lost father if we take that more literally, of trying to reconnect with those who have come before us. This speaks about it in a very literal sense, a supernatural kind of idea of physically reaching out to ghosts or spirits. It even goes back to the idea that much of the life streaming in is ghosts made of smoke and paper trees. So it's not the first time that we've had this word of ghosts implied in here, and but I don't think it's meant to be a literal reading of it. I think it's more about finding a way to possibly spiritually connect with your ancestors, or maybe just to find a closeness to them in whatever way you can, whether it's, knickknacks, keeping, a letter that your grandmother gave you before she passed or something like that. But it's all done in a very metaphorical manner. I'm not quite sure about this idea of the wires, though. It says that we guard and love the wires of empathy. Out of all of the wires of empathy are the ones that we loved and guarded beyond all of the other wires. I'm not quite sure what that is. It kind of puts me in the mind of like the threads of fate kind of concept. But wires is a very different visual. Like it's still this thin, um, could be flimsy, connection between things. But the idea of wire, which is typically more metallic, and thread, which is just fabric, I mean, they're kind of different. I'm not sure if they're trying to make that connection there or not. But the idea of this wires of empathy is just kind of going over my head. I like the idea about the dogs traveling back and forth between fear of the unknown and the blazing sun, though. Because assuming that we are literally talking about this concept of reconnecting with those who have passed, it could be the idea of purgatory. The dog would be a representation of those who have not quite gone on to the next phase, still have a foot left in this realm. They travel back and forth between the two rocks, the fear of the unknown, and the blazing sun. So, the blazing sun, at least in my eyes, would be the acceptance that you've moved on and it's time to go into that, whatever that is. It could be a metaphor for the brightness of heaven, or whatever. Just the next passage. Whereas the fear of the unknown is more about sitting where you're at, kind of keeping that one foot in the other realm, trying to reach through the veiled and reconnect with loved ones. You know, you think, oh, it's time for me to move on. Let's go do it. And you get over there and you're like, oh, but I really don't know what's going on. And that cements you back into the fear of the unknown, kind of jumping back and forth between these two. Um, and it's interesting that it utilizes all of this natural element to it, right? Running back and forth between rocks, the blazing sun, the paper trees, and the ghosts of smoke, all natural visualizations. So yeah, I mean, maybe that's what it's all about, is um, the pain of losing a loved one. And like I said, when I broke down some of the emotional themes, wanting to fill a void, which would be bring back someone who has passed, knowing you can't, but not allowing yourself to give up that hope. Kind of like being stuck in grief, not allowing yourself to accept what it is. Because honestly, just as much as it is for them to move on into their next phase, what does it mean to accept that your loved one is gone? What is on the other side of grief? What does it mean to, understand and accept that that person's gone, and there is nothing that can fill that void, no matter what social connections you make, no matter how similar of a person you might meet to that person, they are never going to be them. So there's a fear, there's a dancing, a walking between the two rocks, the fear of the unknown and the blazing sun, for both those who have passed and those who remain. And assuming that that's the right reading, I think it's interesting in that way that the correct path is for them to both walk away from the veil, to stop trying to find that closeness. But I think that kind of goes against a lot of what the final element is saying about kind of reconnecting with those who have passed. Tell your secrets to your lost fathers. Although, I'm reading into that, I'm not looking at what comes after that. It says, in this conversation, just the substitute for whistling, words rattling, blowing on puffs of air. It likens the words in this conversation, the secrets that you tell, to nothing more than just air. Maybe it is less of a supernatural and more of a realist view, or not, I shouldn't say realist, more of an atheistic view, scientific view of the afterlife, where there actually is nothing on the other side. And instead of two people sitting in this issue of moving into the blazing sun rather than sitting in their fear of the unknown, it's just the one person who needs to move on. And instead, they're holding on to these ideas, these trinkets, these knickknacks, things that connect them and keep them in their grief. That the words they tell themselves, or the words that they say to these items that they feel connects them to this person, is nothing more than words rattling around or whistles. I don't know. This is a very vague track, at least lyrically. Musically, I'm very aware of what's going on. Um, and much like Colin's last track that we checked out, very emotionally affecting on me. Anyways, those are my thoughts on Colin Stetson's Fear of the Unknown and the Blazing Sun. This is where you guys come in. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know what your take on this is. Let me know how you feel about this one. Let me know if you teared up a little bit. Because I sure did. When you're done commenting, head up to the description box and there's a link for Linktree. It takes you to this menu. There's a bunch of stuff in it. Special selection, Patreon, Twitter, email, just a bunch of stuff. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for this one. However, 14 seconds ago, the special selection for today came out. Be sure to check that one out. Otherwise, I'll see you guys tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC, as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.